And we are live.
All right, good morning and welcome to the House Environment Committee. This morning, we are continuing our conversations about water quality, and we welcome Jared Carpenter from the Lake Champlain Committee. Good morning.
Morning, Madam Chair. Morning, members of the committee. Thank you so much for having me. This is obviously first time this year with new faces and new committee members. So great to see you. I haven't met some of you personally yet, but I'll make a point of doing that. My name is Jared Carpenter. I'm the water advocate for the Lake Champlain Committee. Lake Champlain Committee, it was founded in 1963. It is a bi-state nonpartisan organization dedicated to lake health and accessibility. We are known for our cyanobacteria monitoring program. We have members in Vermont and in New York. And so a little bit about myself. I think this is my fifth biennium, so we're going into 10 years. I've been doing mostly water quality issues, but also land use and a few others, pesticides in this building. But I have been engaged in the Lake Champlain TMDL and all the different pieces since Act 64, which is the Vermont Clean Water Act, was passed and signed by the governor in 2015. So what I'm going to do is not necessarily build off of, but John Groveman yesterday took you through some history and some aspects of the Clean Water Act, and Mike O'Grady did that last week. I'm going to sort of narrow and focus on the Lake Champlain TMDL, phosphorus and water quality in Vermont, and then get into the mechanisms that were passed to address those issues, including the Clean Water Fund, which is one of our most important financial drivers in terms of clean water projects and programs in the state. A lot of it focused on Lake Champlain Basin, but there are aspects of the Clean Water Fund that are focused on water quality projects, dedicated to water quality projects outside of the basin. Understanding that it's not just Lake Champlain that has water quality issues that need to be addressed. So I will go through, obviously at any time, fire away at questions rather than trying to sort of memorize them and ask later. And I will try to keep moving along here. So one thing I like to start with is to remind people, and there is a lag. There is a lag on this by a couple of seconds. Obviously, Vermont's economy relies heavily on tourism. People come up here to enjoy the outdoors. People don't want to come up and recreate on the Green Lake. Some of the numbers here, Vermont Treasurer Beth Pierce at the time put together a 2017 Clean Water Report, $2.5 billion spent annually by visitors and vacation homeowners. That's $318 million in tax and fees revenues, and that was in 2013, and it's gotten more. Obviously, we had a lag during COVID when we had the 2-week period where people couldn't enter into Vermont, technically, the 2-week quarantine period. But then we certainly came roaring back with all the federal money that was put in people's pockets, their savings and everything like that, and we spiked, and that shows in the Clean Water Fund as well, and I can show that a little bit later. $82 million in RVing, $70 million in boating. Foliage season, and this just blew my mind. Foliage season this past year, 2.5 million visitors invested $500 million in the Vermont economy. They come up here to see the leaves, to see the rivers, to see the lakes, to be in the great outdoors. I think some of that was heavily skewed because people still have a little bit of money burning a hole in their pocket, but it really highlights the importance of having a clean environment to help benefit our economy. And it's more of the same. This is from a Lake Champlain Basin Program study a number of years ago. I think the important point from this is the middle of that paragraph. It says a 1 meter decrease in water clarity, Lake Champlain, during the months of July and August would lead to a loss of 195 full-time equivalent jobs and 12.6 million reduction in tourism expenditures. We've gone more than a meter over the past 20 some odd years. Phosphorus runoff from multiple sources, agriculture, stormwater, erosion from stream banks, runs into Lake Champlain, runs into our rivers, and feeds cyanobacteria blooms. It's their food. So lack of wind, warm water, climate change, and cyano are leading to these types of blooms on Lake Champlain. But it's not just Lake Champlain. We're starting to see blooms in other areas as well. This is Mirror Lake, Calais, Bristol Pond, and disturbingly, we're also starting to see it in our rivers. This is the Poultney down west of Rutland. This is the wildlife management boat launch area. Obviously, this river is probably not moving very well. There's not a lot of motion, but we're starting to see, who wants to go to this boat launch and put their boat in the river right here. So this is an issue that needs to be addressed in multiple areas.
Representative Sacklers.
Yeah, how recent are we noticing these kinds of changes with the rivers and some of these lakes?
My understanding in the last year or two for this photograph here. There's also some in the Black River has been noticed. Lake Champlain Committee tries to keep monitoring and have, monitors in multiple different areas. But we also get people, this was from Mrs. McDevitt here, says, this is what I noticed and sends us some pictures. So we're starting to see it. We're starting to see it all over.
Some change then.
Correct. Oops.
Are there folks working on, is it temperature change? Is it increased flow? Is it all of the above? What are the hypotheses here that?
I think it's a matter of all of the above, especially temperature change. The warmer summers, the warmer weather helps feed the blooms and helps, the runoff, and helps feed the blooms. It's the wind that helps break it up and flowing water. So when you get winds on Lake Champlain, it starts moving things along and it doesn't give the blooms time to bloom, time to set. I think that's the same with the rivers. So during slower parts of the river, you can have these blooms, but obviously in some place like the Winooski, where it's faster moving water, it wouldn't occur, even though, the Winooski here gets pretty darn warm in the summer because it's shallow and we certainly have our fair share of runoff. So I think we're starting to see these trends in different areas, and we have to be cognizant of the fact that this is being caused by phosphorus and nutrient runoff in multiple different areas. So it's becoming an issue outside of Lake Champlain.
Representative Tagliavia.
These blooms that you're talking about, do they only occur in shallow water?
No, but mostly because the shallow water, it gets warmer faster.
That's what I.
Mallett's Bay is a classic example. It's versus the main lake, which is much deeper. So I think you do have the potential for blooms in the deeper waters, but it's really close to the shore. Well, Lake Carmi, classic example. Lake Carmi is sort of has been trying to address with cyanobacteria blooms for years because they are sort of a closed water system with discharge coming in from agriculture and from other sources, and it's fairly shallow. So they've been progressively getting worse and worse blooms over the years, and they've been working to address it in various manners, be it, of course, addressing runoff from particularly from agriculture, but also from septic and impervious surface. And then they've been trying other methods as well. There was an aerator involved of having. It's basically a technique where you put an aerator in the water and it generates bubbles and everything, so it breaks up the water column. Didn't work very well. They're moving on to other things, but Lake Carmi really has become sort of it's not the right word, petri dish, but for experimentation on
Proving ground.
Yes, we've been working on that one for a long time. One of the reasons Lake Champlain is so susceptible to blooms is that it has a much larger land area to the lake than a lot of other areas do. So it has more wastewater discharges, more stormwater and ag runoff discharges going into the water body than you see in other Great Lakes, so to speak. Classic example, Lake Champlain drainage basin to the lake volume is 19-1. Lake Michigan is 2-1. So Lake Michigan is a much larger body of water, of course, but it has per square acreage, it doesn't have as much nutrients running into it, where Lake Champlain has, this big land mass. It's a good portion of the state. So all those nutrients are flowing into the lake and contributing to this. Just sort of breaking it down a little bit. I get asked fairly frequently, well, what is New York doing in terms of this? Well, they have their own programs, but they're not doing as much because they're not contributing as much. Pie chart over my shoulder, you look at the yellow and it's a little hard. Well, actually, it's not bad. But WWTF is wastewater treatment facilities. So in Vermont, we get about 25 metric tons a year. This is back in 2015 of phosphorus discharge into Lake Champlain. But the non-wastewater was 606 metric tons. So Vermont contributes about 69%, 70% of the phosphorus runoff to Lake Champlain. This is back in 2015 when they were doing when they were designing the Lake Champlain TMDL. By comparison, New York is at 23%, significantly less in terms of the non-wastewater, at 182 versus 606. And of course, Quebec has a little portion up top, and they're about 8%. So you see this in different ways. I mean, the reason New York doesn't have as much discharge is, yes, they have Plattsburgh and they have some agriculture, but they also have the Adirondacks. So they've got a big old state park where we have development in agriculture pretty much, all the way along our border of Lake Champlain. And that's really contributing. And we have long rivers. Winooski stretches all the way up into Cabot. The Missisquoi goes into the Canadian border and comes back in. So there's a lot of getting back to that landmass. There's a lot of flow that goes into the lake. And if you want to break it down even more so, it's so yellow is agriculture, red is developed lands, green is forests. And what the EPA did when they were doing the TMDL is they sort of broke it down by segment, and you can see what's coming. Obviously, Burlington, there's no agriculture, Burlington Bay, it's all developed lands. But when you get down to the Otter Creek, there's much more yellow. South Lake, Port Henry, Missisquoi is a little bit covered up, but they have a fair amount of developed land. Going into St. Albans and going into Mallets is a lot of agriculture. That's not to say it's all agriculture, but there is a lot of agriculture contribution to phosphorus discharge in Champlain. And when the total maximum daily load program was put together by EPA, there was a real focus on agriculture as being one of the major sources, but also one of the low-hanging fruits, because a lot of that stuff is easier to clean up than it is with stormwater and wastewater and some of the others. So you can really see by different segments and different lakes, what was contributing more. So I have to pull up my notes on this one just to make sure I get the sequencing right. So the EPA sets national pollution criteria for various contaminants, including phosphorus, but it sets it for chloride and for nitrogen and for lead and everything like that, of exactly what's considered a safe level and what's considered a contaminated level. When a water is impaired, it goes on to what's called the Clean Water Act 303D list for impaired waters. And the EPA will then set a reduction goal. What are your targets? And then it's the state's responsibility to figure out how to get below those targets. In 2015, the EPA, 2016, the EPA set our reduction targets for phosphorus in the Lake Champlain Basin. And you'll see the top circle is what was the base load. So where we started. You see agriculture is about 41%, stream banks 21, developed lands 18, et cetera. And where we needed to wind up, their goal in 20 years, 2036, is down here. So agriculture needs to go from 261 to 218, developed lands down to 93. Interestingly enough, developed lands is allowed to become a little bit of a bump in terms of the overall percentage. But another big one is stream banks. And this, our Vermont reductions required to get our discharge down to 213 metric tons a year, so 34% of what the base load is. So here's where we need to go. Here's where we were, and this is the math, so to speak, on how we get there.
I'm sorry if I missed it, but where we were when?
2015.
Okay, so do you have any data on incremental progress?
Yes. Slides. I don't know which slide number I'm on.
Representative Bartholomew.
What does stream bank mean?
Stream bank is erosion. So the water cuts into the stream bank and washes away part of the bank, and sedimentation, turbidity into the water, with the phosphorus bonds onto the sediments. So they all sort of travel down together.
Representative Austin.
Is developed land stormwater?
Correct. Impervious surface. So developed lands are municipal roads, highways, driveways, your roof. Parking lots are a big one. So any impervious surface, even down to, in some cases, gravel roads and packed dirt. If water hits it and runs off, it's considered part of the impervious surface.
And we don't regulate that.
Oh, we do.
Vermont can regulate like private roads?
We do regulate stormwater. It's, yes, through various permitting regimes. Um, well, I'll get to it, in a little bit.
Representative Tagliavia.
I don't see on this, maybe I missed it, residential properties along streams, rivers and lakefronts.
Residential properties, under certain circumstances, residential properties would be included under developed lands. Not all individual houses would be included if they were. There's different permitting levels for developed lands. There's the multi-purpose, multi-sector general permit. There's the municipal roads general permit, which is just like it sounds, covers many roads within 100 yards of a water body or going across. For new development, the stormwater trigger is a half an acre of developed land. And then there's the 3 acre stormwater regulation, which is 3 acres of impervious surface together. If it was developed before 2002, would trigger the permitting requirements for that general permit. This isn't my expert area, but a single standalone home all by itself would not necessarily trigger, any requirements to fall into the developed lands segment.
Representative Logan.
This is more a question for you. This is leading me to ask, I'm sure you've already thought of this, but are you planning for us to learn everything about all the different permitting requirements that are related to water quality?
Probably not everything.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Although, we can talk about if you want to. Learn
Just
more.
as a policy mechanism to help with these goals here that we're supposed to achieve by
Yeah.
2036 and how successful they have been since the new TMDL.
Yes, okay, great.
So, and as specific as it gets, it's broken down by lake segment. So different lake segments have to do different requirements. I mean, if you look, agriculture production areas, which is basically the stormwater area of agriculture, is pretty even all the way across, but agriculture non-point. So from fields, if you're in the South Lake and the Port Henry area, that's a higher reduction level versus some other areas like the Main Lake, Shelburne Bay, Burlington, Mallets have especially down here in Missisquoi, have a higher percentage reduction they need to meet for developed lands. So it's fairly formulaic, not only within the pie chart of exactly who's supposed to get down. Those are the target goals for the various areas. Wastewater, as you can see, for Missisquoi, I'm pretty sure Missisquoi has already hit this target. Don't quote me on that. Same with St. Albans. Wastewater is a very inefficient way to achieve phosphorus production goals. For the bang for the buck, it's really expensive. Other part of the spectrum is agriculture. Agriculture for bang for the buck is much more cost effective in reducing phosphorus. And then everything else sort of falls in between.
Representative Tagliavia.
Very expensive to who?
It could be, depends on your funding source. I mean, generally when you go to upgrade, I'm going to speak in generalities and there's always exceptions, but when a lot of places go, a lot of municipalities upgrade their wastewater systems, they bond. Or there's various programs like the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund or the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund, which is just that. You have we put in state money to get federal match. I think it's 1 to 5, and have a pot of money where a town then applies and says we need $10 million to upgrade our drinking water system, and then that's stretched out over no interest or low interest loans over the course of 10 years. The goal, of course, being that it's a loan fund, so there's always money coming in as there is money going out, so we never quite deplete it. But we do match almost every year to try to draw down more federal money. So we have, especially considering after the floods, that's been a major source of funding for rebuilding water infrastructures that has been flooded out. Drinking water systems, wastewater systems. There are other federal programs. There are other state programs, not only for town-wide wastewater and community wastewater systems, but also much smaller systems in town if you want to do infill development, but you don't have, the capacity within a small town. There's grant programs for that. There's a lot of different pots of money depending where you're going. I'm certainly not the expert. Neil Kamen, who was here, that's usually his division is wastewater water investment division.
Since if I can follow on, agriculture seems to be a huge contributor. Are there an equal number of opportunities for agriculture to get assistance?
There is. Your 11 o'clock guests, I think, would be better as the AFM's coming in to talk about it. But there are in the Farm Bill, and I know we're waiting on a new Farm Bill from the federal government, but in the Farm Bill, there's federal sources of money through the Clean Water Fund, which I can point out in a little bit. There's a significant amount of money out of the Clean Water Fund. I believe for the FY 26, there's requested $13 million, which is a combination of state revenue, capital bonded money, and others. And that specifically goes into the agency to help farmers pay for fencing to keep the cows out of the river, or, how do you meet the regulations? It's to help that out. One of my later slides, could there be more money? Absolutely. There could always be more money. We're actually on a curve of our money's going down, not up. But yes, there's a significant number of revenue sources for agriculture. A lot of it is complicated. It's sort of state money is leveraged to federal money. So the different programs, we put up 20% and they cover 80%. The conservation districts do a lot of that work too, helping out. So I suggest a good question for Secretary Tebbetts.
Representative Austin.
But I didn't forget my question, but I didn't, it was a ways back and I just wanted, to understand something, but it's fine.
If you remember, ask me. after.
Okay.
If you remember,
Okay.
fine. You can- whatever you want to do.
Yeah, I don't remember. Keep going.
Okay.
Okay. You did remember.
So those were the targets that were set in the Lake Champlain TMDL, the total maximum daily load for the state of Vermont. The legislature enacted two bills in order to do this. The first one was Act 64 in 2015, the Vermont Clean Water Act. The second one was in 2019, known as the Clean Water Services Delivery Act. The Clean Water Act, Vermont Clean Water Act, was the one that set the regulations to achieve the TMDL goals. It's the one that established the stormwater regulations, the required agricultural practices, the large and medium farm permitting systems. It also updated the accepted management practices for logging, getting back into the sort of the forest and the erosion issues. Some of that was from logging trails and things of that nature. It also established funding programs, the Clean Water Fund, which I'll talk about a little bit more, and then the Agricultural Water Quality Special Fund. That fund was specifically created from agriculture permitting fees for large and medium farms to go directly to the Agency of Agriculture to fund their inspection, regulation, and enforcement program, as well as the technical advisors who go out into the field and help farmers, implement the regulations. So that's a dedicated funding source. I'm not 100% sure how big the staff is. I want to say it's in the 20-ish staffers area, give or take a couple. But I'm sure the secretary will talk about that more at length. Clean Water Services Delivery Act was passed in 2019. It encourages, it created a program that's being run mostly by the RPCs on a watershed basis that has its own funding source to work on non-regulatory projects. So certain things are required by regulations and it gets us here. Non-regulatory projects are extra clean water projects that bump us up to the next level in terms of phosphorus reduction. It also restructured the Clean Water Fund to help prioritize certain spending in certain areas. So those were the two main mechanisms. Elements of Act 64 are still being implemented. A lot of the stormwater provisions were pushed back and those are going into effect now. The Municipal Roads General Permit, 3 acre, where the agriculture, the RAPs and things are more front loaded. So it's still going underway. And I think you'll see in our reductions, as some of those programs ramp up a little bit more, we will see a better curve, so to speak, in our reductions. Almost 10 years later, how are we doing? Well, this is our goal. This is from last year's Clean Water Initiative Performance Report. This is our goal of our target, remember 218. This is where we are. We've been stagnating a little bit. Now, granted, the performance report that came out yesterday, I didn't have time to incorporate it. These numbers are adjusted a little bit better. But you can see here's where we need to go by 2036, 2037. And here's the projection where we are. This line is probably bent up a little bit more. Neil likes to say it as like the jobs report. When the jobs report comes out in the month, you get a certain number, but a couple of months later, they adjust it a little bit once they get all the numbers right. Same thing here. It's, the numbers are a little better than what they were, but we need to do more to bend the curve. I mean, even if it's here-ish, it's not getting us where we need to go. And these numbers are based on last year's performance report. And you can see, so here's agriculture, is the yellow. And it has gone up, and agriculture is actually the one that lags the most. So this is actually a little bit higher. I got the numbers on my iPad. So it's not as much of a bend and a plateau. It's still a little bit of a curve, but it needs to be more up here. As you can see, some of them, this is stormwater, is just starting to kick in. So one would expect the stormwater to expand. Natural resources has been fairly stagnant. And I think agriculture hit a point, again, a question for Secretary Tebbetts, that they've hit the low-hanging fruit. And if you say that the new number is for yesterday's performance report, it's not 47.3. It's the updated number now is for 2022 is 47.3 instead of 45, and they've upgraded it to 57 for 2023. So 2023 went up significantly. Again, the jobs report. But if our overall goal in 10 years, 11 years from now is 213 metric tons a year, and we're at 57 metric tons a year, math isn't a strong suit, but that's like a quarter-ish the way there. So one could make an argument that what do we need to look at? Are the regulations doing what they should? Are the non-regulatory projects in Act 76, the Clean Water Service Provider Program, are they working? Does there need to be more of a shift? Does there need to be more money? Is the money being invested? I mean, I don't have answers to this. These are all just sort of the questions that we think about once we've hit pretty much the 10-year point of going into effect in 2015 and having our 2036 mark is, we're about a year or two shy.
Representative Sakowicz has a question.
Yeah, if you could go back one slide, Jared. So when we try to predict the future, which is difficult, we want to figure out like what's going to be the rate of improvement, and your hypothetical lines of where we would need to be and where we are very much linear.
Yes, well, these are Secretary Moore's.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Secretary
Yeah,
Moore's lines. No, I don't take any credit. This was from testimony of hers last March.
this would be great to get your comment on what you think of these particular kinds of projections then, because when we go back to look at the bars going back a few years, it looks like the improvements are not linear. And so I'm wondering,
Oh, I see where you're going. I mean, theoretically, you could say
it looks
this
more,
line's gonna go up, up to here and then up. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but the bars themselves could.
they could, but a lot of it will depend upon what the nature of the previous decreases, in load were compared to what the future holds. And so it could be that we made some dramatic improvements that were more exponential in the past because there was some sort of low-hanging fruit, things that were relatively easy to get to. And so we saw some really nice benefits from the money that we spent. But maybe going into the future, it's going to be a lot harder.
Maybe it goes the other way.
It might even go the other way. So I guess, when we make these projections, I just would like to know more about, what's the data behind them? What's the reasoning behind them? Just at face value, it sort of looks like, well, we're just going to draw a straight line, but I would posit that maybe that's not.
Could it be going this way or could it be going this way? We're still rising, but not as maybe at a lower.
We're going to be creating, trying to create, policy to sort of fix what seems to be a problem going into with our future projections, it seems like it would be really important to know, like, are these linear? Are they curved? Because it's going to make a huge difference in terms of what we need to do.
So
Yeah.
we're gonna have Julia next week because the report just came out. So we'll have a chance to ask that.
The report is 220 some odd pages.
Read it over the week.
Haven't read the whole thing yet. It's a lot of it's Emily Bird, who works in Neil's shop. She does her team does a fabulous job of putting all this together by sectors, and it's her team that also does the projections on phosphorus reductions by projects and how they reach all of these different, all this is modeling. I mean, you don't 100% know exactly if it's, you save an acre of wetlands, you can project that it's gonna save you this much phosphorus. But like you were saying, it's, you base it on different models around the country, what's been working in Chesapeake Bay and others. But at the end of the day, it's modeling. So like you were saying, there's not a lot of, unfortunately, I can't sit here and be certain about it.
Representative Nor.
Just to comment on modeling, that was my area of expertise when I was in engineering, is mathematical modeling. One of my favorite quotes from a statistician in the 1960s is, all models are wrong, some are useful. I just thought I'd share that. Sorry. You haven't heard that.
Hopefully this is more useful than wrong. So one area I wanted to get into, as I mentioned, is the Vermont Clean Water Fund. Clean Water Fund was passed as part of Act 64. Revenue sources have been added over time. The first one, property transfer tax, clean water surcharge, was the first one, A1, that was added. Actually, number 2 was added at the same time. In the time I've done this, I don't think the Clean Water Fund has gotten any gifts or donations, but it's nice to put that in there in case somebody wants to bequeath money to the fund. 2 or 3 years later was the escheats, the unclaimed beverage container deposits. That's actually a relatively stable funding source. And then the most recent one that was added under Act 76 was 6% of the revenues from the meals and rooms taxes. So that didn't increase the meals and rooms tax. It just took 6% out of the pot and directed it over to the Clean Water Fund. How that sort of breaks down, the top bar is really just more to show that under various revenue projections, the numbers will change. But this FY24 is pretty much the most stable number that we have because it's already passed. FY24, the clean water surcharge was about 8.1 million. The escheats 3.5, meals and rooms 14 to 15. And how that all breaks out into part of the clean water budget, you can see over here, where this is the proposed budget for next year, where the PTT is about 31% of the clean water fund. So the state revenue total is about 28.4. There's always between 10 to 12-ish $12 million in the capital bill. In the clean water fund, that's gone up, that's gone down. There's always some one-time funds. And also on top of this, there's always some federal funding. But this has been our funding source over the course of, the past almost 10 years. So under Act 76, we are to maintain a general goal of $50 to $60 million. That sort of projected how much we would need to hit our targets by 2036 from whatever sources. It doesn't have to just be state money. It just doesn't have to be state revenue. It could be bonded, federal, what have you. Over the years, this is the blue is the Clean Water Fund. Let me stand a little over here. Blue is the Clean Water Fund. It was a little lower. Those of you who remember once upon a time, treasurer at the time, Beth Pierce, suggested a big chunk of bond money. That's what the capital bill is, to sort of jumpstart the program, knowing that it would go. So I think it was $22 million, knowing it would go back to 10, 12 now.
Can you give us an example of those capital bill covered types of projects?
There's a fair amount of capital. So it's infrastructure. You can think of it as concrete, solid objects. So it could be a waste lagoon. It could be drinking water systems. It can't be wetlands restoration. It can't be riparian plantings. That's how I always think of it, as capital money has to go to like building a solid structure. And then when we hit COVID and all the federal money that happened afterwards, the American Rescue Plan Act is the red bars here. It really bumped us up. $1.02 billion came into the state from the American Rescue Plan Act, and then there was some subsequent acts after that. It was very narrow in what you could use it for, but for clean water, you could use it for wastewater infrastructure, combined sewer overflow programs, things of that nature. In terms of meeting our CSOs and water infrastructure, it was, for somebody who's been fighting for $5 million forever to have, I'm not sure of the final total numbers that were spent. It's a little greater than this, but to have, $150, $170 million fall out of the sky over the course of 2 years to upgrade wastewater infrastructures, especially in some of our towns like this one, Rutland, Burlington, where you're talking, Rutland still has some drinking water pipes that are made out of wood. This one, you start pulling out of the ground, they're these lead things that are all twisted up, and we had a lot of work to do. This is very helpful. But now that's over. So we're back down to $46 million. But the other booster that's helping us right now is one-time money. When the Clean Water Board, who disallocates where money's supposed to go for the Clean Water Fund, makes their projections, they're pretty small c conservative on how much money we're going to get for meals and rooms tax and property transfer taxes and things like that. So there's usually leftover money. Like, let's say it's, out of the 6%, they've only spent 4% of the meals and rooms tax. So that gets reinvested. But once the one-time money starts going down, i.e. people don't have the savings burning the hole in their pocket, or those big checks that we got from the government over the course of a couple of years, we're going to lose the one-time money. And if you take out the light blue bar, like let's say for FY26, if you take out the light blue bar, you're probably putting us down more closer to 38, 39, $40 million for FY for 2016, and not 50 to 60.
Wait, I guess I must have missed something.
Sorry.
If you're not talking about regular, are you calling one-time money also coming from regular sources that are dedicated to the Clean Water Fund?
Correct.
You're just saying it's a bump, but you're calling it one.
They underestimated how much revenue that they would get from the property transfer tax, clean water surcharge, or the meals and rooms tax.
It doesn't seem like it's one-time money to me because it's dedicated to this.
That's what they think. It's called one time because you don't know if you're going to have it, I guess, the next time. And some is saved in reserve. That's using DEC's terminology, but you're right. That doesn't
make sense to me. One-time money, because that's not how we talk about one-time money in the building, and it feels misleading. I get it. You're using it. We'll ask them. Yep.
So getting into two minor pitches towards the end of my spiel here. Property transfer tax, clean water surcharge, as you saw from this slide, it's a good chunk at $8.6 million. It's due to sunset in 2027. So when it was initially established under the 2015 Clean Water Act, it was I think it was extended out to 2018, 2019, and then subsequently that was established out to 2027. But in 2027 it will sunset. So that amount of money will no longer go into the Clean Water Fund. I think the hope was at the time that there would be another revenue source that would take its place. But as often happens in this building, you don't replace revenue sources, you just sort of build on top of them. So effective 2027, this funding source will no longer exist unless the sunset is removed. We'll still have the meals and rooms tax. We'll still have the escheats. We'll still have others. But here's, these are our projections going forward as the PTT as an integral part of the Clean Water Fund. If we're getting into FY 25, 26, 27, it's a good 8.5, almost $9 million of what they're projecting to be. If it sunsets, that's a big hole in the Clean Water Fund. So the advocates this year, myself included, are asking that the legislature just strike the sunset so the Clean Water Fund keeps getting the property transfer tax, clean water surcharge going forward. It's a little bit, I've made it easier than it actually is, just in terms of the sunset. A little bit goes over to a bonding for VHCB and other, things of that nature. Last year it was changed from 0.2% to 0.22% because Well, $100,000 doesn't get you as much in the way of house as it did back in 2015. So things have been extended out a little bit. But the reason we saw that big bump in FY22 at $12 million was because of COVID, and suddenly everybody wanted to move to Vermont. So all the housing prices went up, and so therefore the clean water surcharge funds went up as well, because it's 0.2% of whatever the cost of the homes.
Representative
If
Austin.
we don't meet EPA's levels where we're supposed to be, do we get fined? I mean, I'm just wondering, like, if we sunset that, are we gonna end up paying it anyway?
No, there is no, if we don't hit our targets, there's no funding there's no fine mechanism or anything like that. It's just that, theoretically we could get to be, the state could be sued again, or EPA could be sued again for not, for not enforcing or not meeting its goals. I don't think we've gamed that one out yet, so to speak, on exactly what would happen if we miss those 2036 targets by a lot. I mean, we're making progress. It's
Yeah.
just not as much as one would hope.
Representative North.
Yes, thank you. I have a question. Target, one of the major target area here for phosphorus specifically is agriculture. And different from the other categories around the pie chart there, agriculture is business. They're business owners. They're trying to make money. The only way they survive is if they make money. Otherwise, we don't have agriculture anymore if they don't make money. All the other slices in the pie chart are things that aren't associated with making money, really.
Well, developed lands can be businesses, Bob's used car dealership or something like that.
Right. But what we're trying to do there is just basically control the runoff from impervious surfaces and things. It's not like we're potentially adversely affecting the business per se. What we're asking the farmers to do, though, so I'm one way around to try to ask the question is there another way we could essentially help the farmers help us with this by, rather than raising some tax money from some other way to fund them to do something, to incentivize them to do something that actually helps their business? One of the things we're often doing when we're asking them to reduce phosphorus runoff is to do things like, well, create bigger buffer areas around your fields.
Right.
Which really just takes away from their productive land area, thereby reducing their ability to run their business. Could we kind of do trade-offs with them, say, rather than raising additional tax money to conserve that land or do something additional with that land, say, we'll trade you the reduction in productivity you're going to get for, say, lower electric rates, because high electric rates are killing the farmers.
Right.
They use a lot of electricity, or other trade-offs.
Sort of an offset.
Tax offsets for whatever.
It's certainly, I mean, we're certainly open to things like that.
Money.
That gets a lot of committees in this building when you start doing things like, and then you're right, the buffer debate was a huge debate in, when during the wraps and everything. Should it be 25? Should it be 30? Should it be 50? And the argument was definitely made was, look, you do a 50-foot buffer around and you're going to take out, X number of acres of my corn or hay or what have you. I don't know if we've ever really.
Can we find a way?
Sometimes there was ideas of like a cap and trade or something like that. If you do extra over here, you can do less over there. In terms of the segments, the circles, like if you start doing trade-offs, I'm not entirely sure whether or not you would need EPA's sign off if you started saying, okay, we're going to do more in the developed land sector and less in agriculture, or the other way around. But is there a way to, I think the short answer is yes, but it's, major policy discussions and decisions for this building.
Just trying to get creative around not having to raise so much money to focus on the ag area, just focus on helping them with their business, and they'd be willing. I'd be willing to do more no-till planting, because the no-till planting really reduces their crop production, but it certainly helps crops.
I'm certainly open to that discussion. I don't know, again, another good question I wonder if the agency has thought about that. If we do a little extra bang for the buck on the farm, if we can do, some sort of reduction. There's a lot of there's a lot of incentives programs, there's a lot of tax deductions, there's a lot of things in agriculture already. I don't know exactly where you would sort of reach into, because that would have to, let's say if you're going to reduce their electricity rates, well, someone's gonna have to pay for the electricity rates. So where are you getting that money from unless Green Mountain Power wants to take it as a tax deduction? I have no idea. There's gonna be trade-offs everywhere. I'm certainly open to it because agriculture has done a lot. Agriculture has certainly done the most, but agriculture is also the biggest sector and needs to do more. And how do you get them there without putting all of our farmers out of business? I completely understand it. I don't necessarily have an answer, but I'm certainly open to conversation, discussion, and figuring out how we land there. No, I don't think draconian measures, enforcement is a big issue. Where the money is going is a big issue. But I think we've hit a lot of the low hanging fruit of, okay, cows aren't in the stream anymore. Or, we're not spreading manure at 25 feet on the buffer anymore, or following a nutrient management plan, or manure isn't being stacked 100 feet from the river anymore, or all these things that are in the wraps. But we still have the issues that need to be addressed, and how can we go about addressing the low-hanging fruit? I'm sure you'll hear from the secretary. He likes to say that agriculture has done the most out of any sector in reducing phosphorus runoff, and he's right. But it's also the biggest contributor, so it needs to do the most. And how do we get there without putting people out of business? I'd love to have that conversation.
Representative Pagliavia.
I think you just answered my first question, is the biggest contributor meaning to the phosphorus load.
Correct. If we went back to the yellow parts of the pie.
I was just confused because how large of a sector or population of all of that pie chart is actually agriculture? Meaning how many farms or actual farmers, businesses?
We're having AAFM in 11.
Oh, okay.
They will be
Yeah.
all over those kind of
I think I have a
questions.
better question, but looking at it larger, I'm not sure if you're looking at it from a per capita basis, like in the developed land sector, how many property owners are we talking about versus in the ag sector, how many property owners are we talking about? I don't know. I don't know if that's an apples and oranges that can't really be, or, apples and toasters that really can't be compared, or, I'm not sure if somebody's even run those numbers.
Question. On the pie chart that I went back to in the very beginning, and
This one?
it showed that one. I think it would be helpful to see on that chart actual residential contribution. Properties.
In the blue or in the red area.
Yeah, properties, existing properties along lakes, streams and rivers that
That
are
is-
contributing.
Oh, yeah, and
They
that's-
are.
that is definitely a DEC question. I don't know. I don't know if they've broken it down that far. I've never seen any numbers that could, specifically say, there's this many residential areas versus this many commercial versus industrial. Schools, we've got sort of nailed down because the school's a school. And the cost of the schools have been covered, is my understanding from DEC, along with some other, impervious surface sectors like manufactured homes, mobile home parks. But when you get really right down to it in terms of residential, I don't know if that's a DEC question. I've never seen numbers. And one more plug, Madam Chair. This is more, oh boy, went the wrong way. Sorry, giving everybody who was watching, making you dizzy. Just trying to get to the last, there it is. So an issue that Lake Champlain Committee has been following in recent years is actually chloride levels, salinity in our in our water bodies. I won't go into it too much now. That is a different hour-long conversation. Road salt. I mean, you see it when you wander around here in Montpelier, you crunch on the amount of road salt that is put down. That's more than it's necessary. There are programs in New York and the Adirondacks and in New Hampshire that look to use best management practices, better storage facilities, education, outreach, certification programs, to, as an implementation to get applicators, specifically commercial and municipal applicators, to spread less road salt, but still maintain the same public safety levels that we need. Obviously, it's a very important tool for keeping residents and visitors safe in the wintertime on the roads and on our sidewalks. But this is becoming an issue, and it's not only not only aquatic biota, bridges, culverts, increased salinity has impacts on our infrastructure. The bottom of cars, everybody who lives up here knows that we lose our cars much faster than other parts of the country because the bottom rusts out and they no longer pass inspection. And a big one that is starting to affect water quality systems across the country above the snow belt is drinking water systems, both public and private. You put down road salt on roads, on sidewalks, it melts, the snow melts, it rains, it leaches into the surface water or drains into surface water or leaches into the groundwater. There have been studies that show when that salinity increase gets into the drinking water systems, it affects heavy metals, releasing more copper and lead into drinking water systems as one of the main contributors of lead levels in Flint, Michigan. And they're also seeing it in private wells where it can leaches into the groundwater in a private well. It starts corroding the inside. It starts affecting the lead levels, and you will have increased lead levels in a private well. People don't even know it because they're not in a big drinking water system. This is an issue that is just starting to be addressed in various areas, and there is legislation being worked on. But since it's one of the pieces of legislation I'm working on, I had to give it a plug. So you'll probably at some point in the future talk about that issue more.
Well, thank you for your presentation. Do members have further questions? That was great. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much appreciated.
Yeah.
Let's see.
All right, members, we will take a 10-minute break and come back at the top of the hour to hear from the SERV